Hey guys, welcome back to Post Series. I want to continue on with the deeper look of the Roto node. This is following up with our Post Series episode on the Draw nodes category. We went through most of these nodes in the Draw category, and I did want to take a little bit of time out to have a deeper look at the Roto node and the Roto Paint node, since these are two of some of the most popular nodes that you'll be using in your compositing work and career. So let's go ahead and take a look at this Roto node. Now to start, we can just, to bring in your Roto node, you can just press press the tab key and then type in Roto. And then you can bring it in there. You could also go here to the draw menu and then bring in a Roto node. The keyboard shortcut to bring in the Roto node, one, making sure your mouse is inside of the node graph. You can press O and that will also bring up the Roto node. So as with most things in Nuke, there are multiple ways to do the same thing. So those are just a few ways. Of course, the fastest way is just to press O. And you'll want to learn the keyboard shortcuts in general just to help you work a little bit faster. So let's dive into this Roto node. We have the tools here, and the first one is the arrow. We haven't drawn anything yet, so let's go ahead and start from the bottom actually. So what we'll want to do, and let's just note when we bring in our Roto, it's by default set to alpha, which is the output. Let's switch that to RGB. Let's switch that to RGBA, and then let's switch it back to alpha. So in general, we'll be using the Roto node to create alpha mats. So let's just draw something. Now, if you hold this drop down, if you hover your mouse over this drop down actually, it will show you all of the options for how you want to draw your shape. So you can just choose whichever method, you're familiar with. Rectangles, popular. Well, it's not that popular actually. The Bezier, let's go. The Bezier, maybe the B-spline, and I talked about the open spline before, so I'll go over that a little bit here. Now let's look at this. So we have this shape here. Now I specifically want to show you guys a few things. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and maybe change this to 1 or maybe 2. And by changing this, that's just how many nodes I want to appear in this property setting. By default, it's set to 10, and that could get a little crowded and cluttered, and you could get a little bit confused on which nodes you have selected, which keyframes you're seeing in the timeline, and what nodes you're actually adjusting. If you don't keep this to a smaller number, it just helps you to, when you keep it at a smaller number, that just helps you to see exactly the nodes that you're working on, especially if you're going to be making a lot of changes and keyframes like we're going to be doing here. So let's see what we have. So right now, let's view our alpha form of this node. Actually, what we want to do first, we want to look at that actual node and press A. So I didn't have this Roto node selected. I had my plate selected. Now let's look. This does not look correct, right? If we have our plate here, and then our Roto node looks like it's in the right spot, but when we view the Roto node, it's all the way over here. So I did want to show you guys specifically this, and I'm just going to create a grade node because sometimes we use Rotos for masks. And I'm going to create a grade node and I'll just bring up my red. And then I'll use the Roto as the mask, and that way we can see exactly where this Roto is in real life. Now, as we can see here, when we select the Roto node, it looks like it's covering this girl, but when we plug it into our pipe, we see that the Roto node's all the way over here. And this is a problem that I want to talk to you guys about. When you're rotoscoping and when you're setting up your projects, you need to make sure that all your formats are correct. So our plate format is UHD 4K. Now let's look at our project settings, and we can bring up our project settings by holding our mouse in the node graph and pressing S. That will bring up the project settings here, and we can see that our project is set to 2K Super, which is probably what our Roto node's also going to be set at. So if you double click on your Roto node to bring it up into the properties panel, let's use this arrow here to drop down. And now we see that is the problem. Our Roto node is actually set to the same format as our project, but our plate is not set at that. So if we just open this up and we start drawing a bunch of Roto shapes, and then we finally want to look at our mat or check our mat like we're doing here, this is a way that I check my mat. I just use a grade node and I mask in the Roto so that I can see what's happening. And then I'm like, oh wait, this Roto is in the wrong spot. What happened? Usually what happened is the formats are not matching. So it's very important in Nuke to make sure your formats are matching. So let's look at how to fix this. So what we want to do is we can go ahead and make sure our project settings match our plate settings. So our project format, I should say. So let's go ahead and select this as our format. And now we immediately see that Roto node is fixed because the Roto is set to format. So whatever the format is in the project, the Roto node will go ahead and flip to that. Now, what if we didn't want our Roto to be, actually, let me just go back and show you what happens. So one other way that you can definitely do this is you could just go to this format here and you can change it here in the Roto node itself. So you can change it in the project settings, which you would normally want to do. So you would want to make sure your project is all set up properly before you start doing any work like rotoscoping or anything. But you can also go back and by clicking this arrow drop down, you can change your format inside of the Roto node. Because if your project settings might be correct, you might be working on like a specific show, but you have a bunch of different plates and they might all be different formats. So your Roto might be different formats in general, depending on what you're working on. And you might not want it to be set to the format of the project settings. You might want to specify here which format you want to match. So it's good that you have that option right inside the Roto node. So let's go back to some of these Roto node settings. Now the Roto is set to output alpha, which is usually how we will be viewing the Roto node. So if you hover your mouse over the viewer pane and press A, now we can see our mat. So we can see our mat and then we can see our mat overlay by clicking A again to switch between the alpha. We see the channel switching here, which you can also use the alpha and the RGB. So we have this shape. Now again, you could just go through and whichever shape you want to use, you can just select whichever is making sense. I'll turn this off for now. We are going to go through these settings, and actually I'll just go through them now with this rectangle. So let's just go through some of these settings. First, we have the shapes here, different kinds of splines that we can create. And then here we have some options for the points where we can add, remove, cut, smooth. So we can kind of adjust our points here. So if we have this rectangle, but say, okay, well, I just want it to be create a quick rectangle, but I actually want to match the curve of this window. So you can go ahead and start adding in more points. You could start subtracting points. Yeah, you can start subtracting points. You can start adding points. Just be careful which points you're selecting when you're adding and subtracting areas so that you're making sure you're not messing up. And then you could select your points. So you can go ahead, click that arrow, and that way we could start adjusting the position of these points. So we have something like that. So now we started off with a rectangle and like down here, and now we're able to use some of these tools here to adjust the shape of our Roto. Now, if you didn't notice, since we're on frame 16 on the timeline, the Roto node, when you're drawing shapes, the Roto node will create a key. So this turned blue the minute that I created a new Roto shape. So let's turn that off. Actually, let me just create a new one so you could see it happening in real time. Let's take a look at that. So as soon as I go to draw a shape, this time I'll use the Bezier, and I'm going, and immediately when I draw one point, we get a keyframe here on the timeline. We can see that spline key here in the Roto node, and that is what Nuke will do automatically for you at each position of your at each point where you're adjusting your roto shape. So once you draw it, it will create a keyframe, but every time you adjust it on a different frame, it will also create a keyframe. So one problem that people commonly have, including me, if you forget that you might like your roto shape. Like if I'm not doing intricate roto and I'm just using my roto shape as a mask, what might happen is I might say, oh, this looks fine on this frame, but then I'm working and I'm checking my comp and I'm like, oh, actually, maybe I should have went ahead and brought my roto node all the way down here instead of cutting it off there. So now we have a second keyframe, and we also have a second keyframe here on the timeline. But now let me show you what's going to happen. And this is a common note we get back. Oh, your roto, you have a moving mask, you have a traveling mask. And that's because the mask that we created, the roto, isn't necessary. We didn't necessarily want it to move between frames, but we made two different keyframes on two different frames, so the mat will move automatically. So when you're adjusting your mat, you do want to either make sure you go back to the frame that you were on, or you also have this option to, if you start off at this frame, there's a option here. It's called Ripple, which if we read through it, when enabled, any change to a point is applied to each keyframe of that point in a ripple range. This is useful when you've rotoed a shape consistently but slightly off and need to move the keyframes. So let's go ahead. And now let's look at what happens now that we've adjusted that and then we moved it. Now what we didn't do was we didn't turn on the ripple before we adjusted our shape. So we'll just delete this keyframe. So if you want, you can simply delete one of the keyframes. So this is, you just add a keyframe, and then you can add a keyframe using this, which will create a keyframe, or you can delete the keyframe using that option. So now let's go ahead. Now that we have the ripple turned on, let's change this shape. Now let's correct it a little bit so we can now see. I'm not gonna, I don't know, worry about it being too precise. This is just for a little demo, but I am going to create a tracker for you guys later, so we'll get it in there a little bit better. Okay, and now that we have the ripple turned on, let's move forward, and we see that the change that we applied is now carried over to that second keyframe that we had. So this is also very helpful. Before you go ahead and make that change, just turn on your ripple, and then that change will be applied to all the keyframes that you have. So again, if you don't have it on and you create the keyframe and then you try to turn it on, it's not going to work in that way. You have to turn it on before. So there we have it. And then let's just go through. Actually, I'll just create a keyframe here too, just to show you guys that you can add a keyframe. So now we have a keyframe here, and we have 3 keyframes. Now these 2 arrows here is how you move between keyframes. So you can go to the next keyframe back or the next keyframe forward. So this is useful too when you have a roto node and you have a bunch of keyframes and you're trying to adjust them, but you want to cycle through your keyframes just so you can see what's happening at each one, and maybe possibly delete one that you don't need. You know, you can go about it in that way. Now, as we can see this footage, it looks like the train is moving, but actually it looks like the window's moving and the train is staying the same. If we cycle through, our mat is pretty much being carried over the whole time. I guess the train has a few bumps, and that's good because I want to show you guys how you can create a tracking, apply it to this transform. Now, let's keep going through some of these other options inside of the roto properties. So we have, we went through the spline keys, we went through the format, we went through our output, which is set to alpha by default, and which is one of the most popular outputs that you're going to use. Actually, I'll go ahead and track. I'm just going to track, I'm going to create a track for the train so that we can add this to our roto, so I can show you if you want to just track something. I'm just going to do a quick 1 point track for this. And then we see there's a little tiny bit of movement, so that's good. That's good enough to show you how we're going to get our roto to stick. And let's cancel. We only need that to go to the end. So we have, the reason my tracker kept going is because this plate is actually 770 frames, but I changed my count to 30 frames because we don't need to go through all those. But the tracker will continue going and try to track all of the frames, although my project is also only set to 30. It will try to track all the frames of the plate. So let's go ahead, and now we have this tracking data. And in one of my tracking demos, I talked about how you can export a track. So we're going to just create a new shape. Actually, we'll use the tracker as our match move. So we want to export a match move, and we'll just create that. So this match move is linked to the tracker. And now we're going to create a roto node on this frame. Now it's very important that you either change your transform reference frame to whatever frame you set your roto on. So if I drew my roto here, I would just set that to 15. But we're just going to use frame 1. And then the good thing is, as you're updating this, since this transform match move is expression linked to that tracker, it will also bring in all of the updates that you make to this tracker node. They'll be carried over to that transform. So let's create our roto shape here. And we'll draw this, we'll create a roto over this window. Now this time we do want to, we want this shape to follow the full plate movement without having to keep drawing rotos on any other frames. We'll just use this one frame. And the reason we can do that is because this is just the window. It's not a person moving where we have to continuously change our roto shape. When you're just rotoing or masking out something that's kind of stationary, you can use this method. So let's go ahead and we'll just, I'm taking a little bit more time here to get this shape lined up along the window, just so we can make sure that the track that we created is actually working and this mask is going to work for us in the way that we need to. And to show you guys an example of that, let's see here. And no, this one is a little bit off. Okay, because the way that we're going to track the tracker, you have to if you hold down control while you're selecting, while you're working, you could just select one point. Let's see if this is my shapes get, oops, looks like I pressed the wrong thing on my keyboard. Now I'm viewing the roto node, which I was viewing my plate. So let's go back to that. Yeah, if you press some wrong keys, actually I'm just gonna do this. Just create a new point and just add it in there. If you press the wrong keys while you're working, you'll start, like, tab goes into the 3D space, so you could just press tab again. So you just have to be careful when you're pressing keyboard shortcuts, whether you're in the viewer or the node graph. It will direct you somewhere differently wherever your depending on where your mouse is. So you do want to be careful about that. Okay, so we have this roto node. Now let's check this, how this is looking. Did I draw it on this one or this one? Oh, it was this new one. So let's connect this one in. So now we have this masked into the window. And now I only have one frame, so this roto node is not keyframed. Well, it only has one keyframe, I should say. So we have that. Let's turn this off so we don't get confused. This is what I was saying, like about, and actually it looks like, I didn't draw this roto shape on my first frame. I drew it on frame 16. So since I did that, and that's what I meant about having too many roto nodes open or too many properties open here, you might get mixed up with which roto shape you're actually drawing in or which node. So it's better to just kind of keep it at a low number. Sometimes I change it to 1, but since I'm going to show you how to copy this transform information over from the tracker, I wanted to leave it at 2. And now I'm just going to do this easy thing and just set my reference frame to 16, since that's the frame that I drew my roto on, so I don't have to go back and change it. Okay, so once we have our transform information, we can go to the transform tab in the roto node. Let's go ahead and select root. We want to select the root and not the specific shape. And we want to copy this transform information over to our roto node. So first, we'll just select this curve here and hold down the control key and drag it to the curve in the roto transform node. So we're copying these keyframes over so that our tracking data will be added to the roto that we made. So let's just do that for all of the things that are blue. We want to carry all of them over. And now our roto node is now also linked to that same tracker transform that's linked to this tracker. So let's watch this play, and we'll see that our roto node is going to follow along with the movement because we've added that transform information. And again, there wasn't that much movement in this plate, but there is enough, and that roto node is following it. Now we see some bouncing down here. We could have we tracked this up here. We could have tracked this and then tracked something from down here. And let's just go ahead and do that actually so that we can see. And I want to make sure that our roto is, let's go to, so our roto, this roto was made on frame 1. Let's check our tracker. Our reference frame is 16, so let's set that back to 1 actually. And now we see our roto shape is fitting in down there. And I am going to track another point just because we saw it bouncing a little bit at the bottom. This area and this area are probably moving a little bit separately, so we could just track. We could actually track this, and then we could track this as well. So we'll just track these things. Now let's select the 2 trackers that we want to track forward, and we'll just track them in so that we have this information as well. And we'll cancel that out. And actually, at least for one of them, I'll go ahead and do like the transform, rotation, and scale just to have it. And let's set this to 30 since I cropped my plate. I ended my project settings at 30. Okay, so here we have it. So we've updated that track, and we don't have to do anything because everything's expression linked, so everything will automatically update. And that's the good thing about, you know, kicking out these match moves, exporting them from your track, so that, and then, you know, linking things with the transform. So when you're doing updates, everything will update. I'll just turn my expression links off, and let's check it out now. Let's check this track that we've added to our roto node and see how it's following along. So now we don't see that bouncing down there, because we did these 2 tracks over here that kind of locked that in. Okay, so that's how you would go about, actually let's cancel that. That's how you would go about adding a transform or a tracker to your roto node. You want to add it at the root level. So let's go back to the Roto node because there's so much to cover with this one node. So let's keep going forward. So we did talk about, we talked about the, and yeah, we talked about the arrows that you can use for the different selections. We talked about adding and removing. We talked about the different shapes that you can create with the Roto node. And now we were going through some of the stuff inside of the actual node. So let's make this a little bit bigger. And in the Roto node, you have your output, which is alpha. So when we view the Roto, we can only see it inside of the alpha channel because that's the only alpha channel that we output it to. And that's usually what you would use for your Roto because, of course, we're just trying to create mats for our Roto. We have pre-malt, we have clip to format. So with this clipping, it's clipped to the format, which means, let's move this around actually to show you guys. So if we move this Roto, let's say somewhere like this, and then we keep it at clip to format, let's view the alpha of that. Now I'll add a transform in here and I want to bring this over. We'll see that our Roto shape is still clipped to the format because that's the setting that we chose, and even at it's made at the clip to format, so it's getting clipped at this level. So even though we add a transform later and we want to move it around, since we clipped it already, it's cut off already. But we could go ahead and we could change this to no clip, and then we'll see that our full shape comes back in. So if you're like working with a Roto and you notice that it's getting cut off, then you probably need to change your clip. Now let's just play around with some of these other settings. That's bounding box. We could do the union in the bounding box. So it's still set to bounding box and format. So it's still doing that clipping and then intersecting bounding box. So either the no clip should work fine usually. And don't forget we have this drop down here so that you can make sure your Roto shape is set to the correct format when you're making it. And then you also have some masking options here. Let's go. Okay, so we'll just go through these real quick. So you have the opacity where you can change the value of it. Now, of course, the Roto, yeah, you can change the value. You can change the feather here by feathering it out. You could also change the feathering by simply selecting all the points in your Roto node and pressing the E on your keyboard, which is the keyboard shortcut for feathering. So I'm just pressing E each time and it's going bigger and bigger. And if I want to remove that feather, if you press Shift and then E, it'll go back to the default, which is no feathering. So you could do it this way, or if you want to do a specific value or a specific length, you could go ahead and press E. So I'll just hold down E because I do want to show you guys some of these options here that we have for the fall off of this. Now I'll just tell you what I'm usually defaulting my feather fall off to. I actually most of the time prefer smooth one. So this just changes. Let's look at this grade so that we can see how these different options are behaving. So let's take a look at this fall off. So the fall off is just, you know, when the color starts to fade off at the end. Now, as I said, I usually do like to go ahead and choose smooth one. So you can see how that's a little different. Now, I want to show you guys, I'm actually going to grade this down because I want to show you why I prefer this one. Let's see, it's getting kind of dark. I want to really be able to see that edge. So maybe that's not the right option. We can look here at the top. Yeah, let's just look at the top, how it's behaving here. And actually, maybe I will go ahead and also move this up. If you hold down Control, you can actually move your transform. It's usually good to put it somewhere in the center, but you can place this anywhere so that it's easier for you to, this is your, It's kind of like the anchor point. Let's see. Okay, so we have that move. Now let's go through some of these filter options. Like I say, I like smooth. That's my preferred method. I like the way that it does a good job of blending. But as you can see, when we had the default linear, now this one might be easier to see in the bright spots. So let's keep some in the bright, some in the dark. Now here, when we choose linear, we see we kind of have this hard line. Although it is still falling off, it's more like soft and then it gets really hard fast. So let me show you guys if you don't see what I'm talking about here. You see the fall off here of this red color. See how it's fading out? So let's change it to smooth 0. So this one's even more drastic where it's just a little bit of feathering and then it kind of still looks pretty hard and solid. And then this is my favorite one, the smooth. So this one just more of a gradual fade off, like fall off. I like this one. And then we have smooth. So when you're flipping through these, of course, it depends on what you're working on and what you're trying to achieve with your roto and your feather. You can cycle through them and just see which one's working better for your shot. Like I said, I just know usually that I'm liking the way that the smooth one fall off works, but depending on what I'm doing, sometimes that one doesn't work that well for me. So you can just, see how they're interacting with your shot and if they're helping your integration or not helping at all. And then we have the spline keys, which I did say, which when you're creating a new shape or when you're adjusting your shape, your roto node will create a new keyframe for you. But you can also just create a new key yourself, or you can remove a key if you wanted to. So those are the keyframe options. Now, when you're doing rotos, it's a very good idea to create a folder system. So you can use, or folder system, which are called layers groups in the node. This is just so like if I'm saying this is the window, I'll just name this window and then I'll put this shape right here in the window. And that way I know that, now when that's closed up, this is just a good way to keep your roto a little bit more organized. Otherwise you'll have like 100 shapes in here and you won't know which shape belongs to which object, depending on how much roto work you need to do. This eye here turns on the visibility. So you turn it off and on for that shape. You could do that at the root level. You could do it at the folder level, and you can do it at the roto level. Here we have a lock. So this lock means that you cannot move the roto. So now that it's locked, I can't select it. I can't move. Well, I think I'm moving it with this transform. Let's close that. So yeah, you can't select it, you can't move it, you can't add any points, you can't do anything when it's locked. Here, and if you hover over these two, you'll see what they are. So it's going ahead and telling you, let's just cycle through. So we have the curves. Oh, this is actually just showing us the curves option. But anyway, you have the color here. You have the motion blur. Actually, this is the invert, if you want to invert your mat. So you want to invert this shape. So basically, let's turn this off. Let's turn this off. So basically now what we see is it's doing it's grading everything except for the shape, the inside. So let's look at that too. It's just the invert. It's just flipping the mat. That's all we're doing. There's also an invert option here in the shapes tab. You can just invert it that way. So a lot of the things that are here, these options are also here, these tabs. So we said we have the motion blur here and we have the motion blur here. You have the shape tab where you can adjust the color and you can adjust the invert here. And you can also adjust the blending mode. So And then you have, this is some, and you have the lifetime, which is cut off here. But if we wanted it to be one frame or start to frame, our roto would only exist. Let's go back to our grade so we can see. We did start to frame, so here we see we have a dash and then we have 15. So if we keep playing this, now the roto's gone after frame 15. So it's there before, but it's not there after. So you can adjust the lifetime of your roto shapes. You can choose single frame if you only want it to appear on one frame. You can do the entire frame range, or you can enter a manual frame range here. And then you could also do frame to end. So those are some options that you have. And here, let's see if we, let's add another shape so we can just go through some of these other options here. So let's change this one. We have it now set to over. Let's set it to minus. So you can change the operation here of the roto, how it's behaving. So now you see it's getting cut out. Let's just go through, let's max it. So these are the same as the merge operations. It's just you can use them for your roto. So usually you probably want to cut something out, or you want, this is doing min. You probably want to cut something out, or you just want to add something in. Those are probably the two that you want to use. So that's it for the roto node. Well, that's not it. There's so much more to go over, but that's all we're going to cover today. That's just a brief, well, a little bit more of a deeper look into the roto node.